Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I must have tried on 5 different dresses before settling on the dark green one, the one that made my waist look just a little tighter and my arms a little longer. The heels were new, expensive, the kind of shoes I would never wear to work, but tonight wasn't work. It was the annual Winston & Locke dinner. Every year, our company held a black tie event at Belladine, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Velvet booths, marble floors, and wine bottles older than most of the interns. For weeks, people had been whispering about it like it was the Met Gala. Who was going? Who wasn't? What the CEO would say? What scandal might unfold after a few too many cocktails? It was my first year. I'd only joined the firm 10 months ago, but I'd been killing it in operations, pulling late nights, cleaning up after botched vendor contracts. I'd even won a little employee spotlight in the October newsletter, though it was tucked under a profile of someone's golden retriever. Still, I was excited. More than that, I was ready. I'd gotten my hair done, booked a makeup artist for the first time in my life, and dropped way too much money on a dress I would probably never wear again. I even had a cab waiting to avoid showing up all flustered from the subway. No detail left unplanned. When I arrived, the restaurant sparkled like a dream, lit up like a jewel box, with valet attendants and soft jazz spilling onto the sidewalk. I stepped out of the car, feeling like someone important. Inside, a hostess in a sleek black dress stood behind a podium, holding a gold-trimmed guest list. "Name, please?" she asked, smiling. Margaret Elston. I'm with Winston & Locke." She ran her finger down the list, then back up again. Her smile twitched, just slightly. "I'm sorry, could you spell that?" I did. Slowly. Twice. She checked again, flipping to the back page, then gave a small apologetic shrug. "I don't see you here." My heart sank. Maybe someone made a mistake? I was told the invite went to everyone in the operations team. I even RSVP'd. She glanced at the maitre d' beside her. "I'm afraid this is a closed guest list. If your name isn't on it." I could feel the room pressing in. The clinking glasses, the low laughter, the smell of roasted duck and white truffle. And I could see them through the glass doors. My coworkers, already sipping wine, already pretending to like each other. Brian from finance caught my eye for a split second, then looked away. That was when I heard it. A familiar voice behind me. Brian. "Oh," he said with a short laugh. "You showed up?" I turned. "What?" "I mean, I figured you'd figure it out by now." He smirked. "This dinner's kind of senior team only. We couldn't invite everyone. But hey, there's a KFC down the block if you're hungry." He laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, because he had no idea that in a few hours his entire career would depend on me. And I had one step left. Just one. I stood there, framed by gold-lit glass and the hush of expensive conversation, my heels suddenly sinking into the carpet like the floor was trying to swallow me whole. I hadn't even worked that much on the campaign they were celebrating tonight, some flashy digital rollout for a luxury automotive client. My name wasn't on any slide decks or cocktail napkins, but Brian didn't know everything. In fact, Brian didn't know much at all. He didn't know that I went to school with Grace Whitman, the same Grace who now handled PR strategy for the automotive giant's CEO. He didn't know that Grace and I still talked, that she still called me for real opinions and not press-approved buzzwords. He didn't know that I used to work at Halverson and Company, the legal consultancy that wrote the compliance framework this entire campaign was built on. He didn't know that the language in their licensing contract was fragile, and that a single line of gray area could jeopardize the whole thing if the wrong person noticed. And more than anything, he didn't know that 2 days ago, while doing a favor for IT, I discovered an unpatched back-end vulnerability in the firm's cloud archive, a tiny crack, easy to miss. But if someone were to pull the right thread, the entire campaign, the glossy, overfunded celebration he was currently toasting with champagne, could fall apart in a matter of hours. I hadn't reported it yet. I was waiting, watching. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even angry. Not really. I just remembered. I remembered the way Brian once laughed when I offered to help on the budget models. I remembered how he skipped over me in meetings, how he once called me Marcy and never bothered to correct himself. I remembered the office party where he took credit for solving a vendor compliance issue that I had fixed quietly on my lunch break. He thought I was background noise, a name he didn't need to learn, a face that would never matter. But that was the thing about people like Brian. They never saw you coming. And now, as he turned back into the glowing warmth of the restaurant, smug and stupid, I stood just outside the frame. Not hungry, not hurt, just ready. Ready to make one decision, one step. And I hadn't taken it yet. But I would. I should have known better than to expect dignity from Brian. He had always made a sport of needling me. Small digs wrapped in jokes, little cuts disguised as compliments. It started with where I was from. A small town nobody cared to Google, where kids grew up fast and options came slow. My dad was a mechanic. My mom worked nights at the Dollar Save. We didn't have vacation homes or networking events. We had casseroles and oil-stained hands, and I was never what you'd call polished. I'd always been soft, softer than most girls, chubby in a way that made me try to disappear during group photos. I didn't own a straightener until college. I only learned what toner was 6 months ago. And even now, even after years of clawing my way up, I still catch myself holding my stomach in when I pass glass windows. Still hear the way Brian once said, "You've got such a friendly face. You remind me of a lunch lady." I laughed then, pretended it didn't hurt, just like I did now. "You could try KFC," he said again, his voice slick with mock sympathy. "That's more your speed, right?" My hands clenched the tiny clutch I bought just for tonight. Cream satin with a gold clasp, the most elegant thing I owned. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Brian. I'll keep that in mind." He smirked, already turning toward the lobby, toward the warm lights and flowing champagne, toward the people who mattered. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just a nobody in operations. I wasn't a mistake on a guest list or a filler name on an internal memo. I was the reason the Henderson contract even moved forward last quarter. I was the one who flagged the offshore clause they nearly missed, the one that would have left the company open to litigation from 3 separate countries. I was the one who quietly looped in the senior legal team through a friend of mine at Durham and Stratton and saved the entire quarter's numbers. But they never asked. They never noticed. And now, Brian had made a choice, to humiliate me, to laugh at me, to treat me like I didn't belong. It was a mistake, because I was done being quiet. And soon, very soon, Brian would understand exactly how much I'd been holding back. Just one step, one email, one conversation, one truth dropped into the right pair of hands. That was all it would take. And I had it, right, in my pocket. I still remember the sound the front door made when it shut, that hollow wooden thud that meant nobody else was home. Our house in Willow Bend was never much to look at. Peeling white siding, a driveway that turned into mud every spring. But it was ours. My father bought it with a VA loan, the only thing his time in the service gave him that lasted. My mother filled it with second-hand furniture and endless hope, and I grew up in it, watching the mold crawl across the ceiling like a slow bruise and pretending the heat still worked after October. When my father died suddenly and the medical bills came for my mom, we didn't have time to be sentimental. I was 22. I signed the papers myself. We sold the house for just under $90,000. That money was supposed to go to rent, food, a car, survival things. But I did something different. I bought a foreclosure on the edge of a gentrifying neighborhood. I spent 6 months fixing it up with my own hands, learning everything from YouTube tutorials and gruff contractors who assumed I was someone's girlfriend. I rented it out for double the mortgage. Then I did it again, and again. By the time I was 25, I owned 3 properties and had no debt. My taxes were messy. My fingernails were always chipped. But I had something no one could take away from me: leverage. I didn't talk about it much. People got weird when the chubby girl from nowhere had money. Or worse, when she was smarter with it than they were. The first person who actually saw me was Mr. Harrow. I'd enrolled in a local community business program just to make sure I wasn't screwing up my accounting. He was a guest speaker on logistics strategy, and I asked him a question after class about distribution bottlenecks. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You're not just managing cash. You're building something, aren't you? I shrugged. I want to run something of my own someday. A firm, maybe even a logistics consultancy. You will, he said without hesitation. You think like a manager already, not just top-down, inside out. That sentence stayed with me. Every job I took after that, including Winston and Locke, was chosen with precision. I didn't need the paycheck. I needed the experience, the structure, the dysfunction. I wanted to learn how big companies operated and how they fell apart. I watched middle managers make power plays. I watched upper managers scramble when a client changed their mind. I saw what happened when one weak ego poisoned a whole project, and I started to see how I'd do things differently, how I'd lead, how I'd build. So when Brian joked about KFC, when he treated me like a throwaway administrative error, he wasn't just mocking my dress or my weight or my background. He was mocking everything I'd survived, everything I'd earned, everything I'd quietly been preparing. I didn't fight back that night, didn't scream, didn't cry. But I did make a call the next morning, one that would turn the ground beneath Brian's feet into quicksand, because I was done being the girl they forgot to include. I was ready to be the woman they answered to. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, not exactly. The anger had passed. What came after was colder, quieter, clarity. They hadn't just left me off the list. They'd made it clear I didn't belong, at least not in their eyes. But I didn't need to scream or set fire to the place to make a point. I just needed to leave and take everything I knew with me. At 8:03 the next morning, while the others were still recovering from their wine-soaked victory toasts, I opened my laptop and typed a short message. Subject: coffee? Hi, Natalie. I'd love to catch up. Are you still looking for someone to lead implementation over at Stratfield Group? Let me know. M. Natalie Tran was the operations director at Stratfield, one of Winston and Locke's main competitors. We'd met at a networking panel last spring and hit it off. Unlike Brian, she remembered my name. And unlike the smug inner circle I'd been orbiting for nearly a year, Natalie actually listened when I spoke. Her reply came 20 minutes later. Yes, let's talk today. I've been hoping you'd reach out. By the end of the week, I'd signed a new contract. Senior Operations Associate, client-side strategy, flexible hours, with a clear growth path. They didn't lowball me. They didn't ask where I came from. They asked what I wanted to build. And I told them. Stratfield was different. The team was sharp, hungry, but kind. There were no performative meetings, no ego contests. Everyone pulled weight. Everyone gave credit. It felt like stepping into a room where the air wasn't just cleaner, it was breathable. And I bloomed. Within 6 months, I was promoted. By month 9, I was handling 2 of our biggest logistics clients, one of which Winston and Locke had been courting unsuccessfully for years. I never rubbed it in. I didn't need to. The numbers did the talking. And then, one afternoon, as I stepped out of a client debrief meeting, Natalie stopped me in the hallway. Hey, she said, smiling. Small update. We just got a call from Henderson Group. My eyebrows lifted. The automotive client? She nodded. Yeah, they're pulling out of Winston and Locke, looking for new partners. I think they're disillusioned. I smiled politely, like it wasn't the sweetest thing I'd heard all week. And guess who they asked to speak with first? She added. You. It took everything in me not to laugh, not to run downstairs and shout it into traffic. Brian had once made a joke about fried chicken while sipping champagne he didn't pay for. And now? He was probably sitting in a glass office, wondering why his most valuable client had suddenly gone cold. But that was the thing about me. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the bar. And now I was sitting at the head of the table, while he was scrambling to keep his seat. Long before I walked into Stratfield's sleek, sunlit offices, I knew Winston and Locke would come knocking. It was inevitable. We were circling the same clients, bidding on the same contracts, presenting at the same conferences. And unlike Winston, which had a bloated executive layer and outdated workflows, Stratfield was lean, sharp, and hungry. Natalie had even warned me early on. They're not going to like that you're here, she said over coffee our first week. You were one of their inside people, even if they never treated you like one. I just smiled. They don't even know I left. They think I disappeared. But I hadn't disappeared. I was watching, planning, and preparing. The week after Brian humiliated me at Belladine, I found something I wasn't supposed to see. I was doing a routine system backup, part of a side favor for the overwhelmed IT analyst at the time, when I noticed something odd. A shared folder on Winston's internal server with no encryption and only partial firewall protection. Someone had misconfigured a syncing protocol during a security update, and for roughly 48 hours, that folder had been wide open to anyone with access to our internal project tools. Inside were drafts, contract templates, pitch decks, internal notes, compliance reports, everything from vendor discussions to campaign strategy. I didn't copy everything. I'm not that reckless. But I did take the documents that mentioned our clients by name, especially those tied to licensing structures, client-side dependencies, and pricing projections. I didn't take them for revenge. I took them because I knew I'd need them one day. And now, that day had arrived. Winston & Locke was officially on Stratfield's radar. One of our newer clients, a major logistics and warehousing firm, had received proposals from both us and Winston. The deal was worth millions, a multi-year implementation across 5 continents. The kind of contract that rewrites balance sheets and builds careers. Natalie called a strategy meeting. "I want full analysis," she said. "I want to know their playbook before they even get in the room." I already had it, tucked into a private folder on my desktop, labeled innocuously as Market Reference East. I'd been updating it over time, checking public releases, internal rumors, even comparing their proposals when clients forwarded them for feedback. I didn't alter anything. I didn't fabricate. I simply connected dots no one else could. I knew their blind spots, their weak language, their tendency to overpromise on back-end development timelines. I knew Brian's pitch rhythm, where he would get cocky and where he'd hedge. So when Natalie asked, "Do you think we can outbid them?" I answered without hesitation. "Not only can we outbid them," I said, "we can outmaneuver them." Because what Winston and Locke didn't realize is that they hadn't just excluded someone from a dinner. They had handed a strategist to their biggest threat, and I was no longer sitting at their table. I was setting it. I spent the next 2 weeks working behind closed doors. No team meetings, no Slack chatter, no public document trails with my name on them. I didn't need recognition. I needed precision. The negotiations with Lexicon Freight Systems, the multi-million-dollar logistics firm both Stratfield and Winston and Locke were courting, were scheduled for the end of the month. It would be a closed-room pitch followed by a private Canada session between executives and consultants. Winston and Locke had already confirmed their team, 2 partners, 1 analyst, and, of course, Brian. I saw his name on the shared vendor update when Lexicon forwarded us the list. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't get angry. I just smiled, because I knew Brian wouldn't expect me. He wouldn't prepare for me. And if I stayed hidden long enough, I could guide the entire deal from behind the curtain without him ever realizing I was there. So I made a request. During a prep call with Natalie and our senior strategist, I said casually, "Keep me off the participant list." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "I want Brian blind. The moment he knows I'm here, he'll overcorrect. He'll get careful, and I want him comfortable, arrogant." Her smile was slow, delighted. "You're not just going for the win, are you?" "I want him to dig his own grave," I said simply. "I'll hand him the shovel." She leaned back in her chair and laughed softly. "God, I love you." So that was the plan. Publicly, Stratfield's pitch team would include Daniel from client development, Tina from financial modeling, and Natalie as the lead. Privately, I would be orchestrating every word. I rewrote the proposal language, cleaned up our cost models, crafted soft rebuttals for every predictable claim Winston would throw at Lexicon. And just for fun, I added a quiet little clause to our delivery strategy, one that directly addressed a supply chain redundancy issue Winston had repeatedly failed to solve in past pitches. Something Brian had hand-waved as industry noise. It wasn't noise. It was bleeding money. But he never noticed, because people like him didn't look past the mirror. So while he polished his smile and prepared his usual show, I layered our strategy with substance, with traps. With contrast so stark, it would make their pitch look like a high school group project. They wouldn't even see it coming, because Brian still thought I was invisible. and I was about to become unforgettable. The meeting room at Lexicon Freight Systems looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Steel-framed windows, black marble conference table, chairs that creaked if you shifted wrong, just to remind you not to. Natalie and the rest of Stratfield's official team were already seated when Winston and Locke entered, suits pressed, smiles sharp, confidence oozing like perfume. And right in the center of their team, Brian. His hair was slicked back, probably too much. His tie, some loud paisley thing, screamed, "I'm important." He sauntered in like the room belonged to him, like he was doing Lexicon a favor just by showing up. I was in the adjoining observation room, watching through the mirrored glass, every detail playing out in real time. He didn't see me. Not yet. Natalie opened with a calm, composed summary of our strategy, heavy on numbers, light on fluff, just enough substance to set a tone. Then it was Winston's turn. Brian cleared his throat, did that insufferable, casual nod he thought made him look relatable, and launched into his pitch. I recognized every line. I'd written most of them a year ago. But then he pivoted. He pulled up a new slide, one that wasn't in any version I'd seen. And the moment I saw it, I nearly laughed out loud. It was a modified logistics efficiency projection, color-coded, glossy, and completely wrong. I blinked, then looked closer. He'd reused an old model, one that had been flagged for faulty input ranges during Q3 last year. I remembered the incident. He never fixed it, just renamed the file and shoved it into another deck, and now he was presenting it to Lexicon as real-time data. Natalie glanced toward the mirrored glass. Just once. That was my cue. I stepped into the room. Every head turned. Brian's face froze. He tried to cover it with a smirk, but his eyes widened, just enough to betray him. "Margaret?" he said, like the word was foreign on his tongue. "Good to see you again," I said, taking the seat across from him. Calm, polished, intentional. "I wasn't aware you were with Stratfield." "I asked not to be on the attendee list," I replied sweetly. Surprise. The Lexicon executive shifted in his seat, interested now. "Miss Elston has been overseeing our comparative review. She's quite thorough." Brian flinched, but tried to recover. "Well," he said, flipping his report closed, "I'm sure she'll appreciate our projections." I took the remote, connected to the display, and pulled up a second version of his chart. "This projection," I said, pointing to the screen, "uses outdated cost curves from 2 fiscal years ago. It also fails to account for Lexicon's expanded European corridor, which you've incorrectly modeled as a static cost line." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Also," I added, advancing the slide, "you've omitted currency fluctuation factors from the South American routes, which, as you know, could alter net efficiency by up to 17%. Silence. I turned to Lexicon's team. "At Stratfield, we reran the numbers using real-time corridor data and dynamic adjustment curves. We'll email you the simulation model after this." Brian's face darkened. His jaw tightened so hard I thought it might crack. "Margaret," he said under his breath, "we can talk about this later." "No," I said, without looking at him. "We'll talk now, in front of the people it matters to." He looked at Natalie, then at the Lexicon team, and for the first time since I'd known him, Brian had nothing clever to say. Because I hadn't just caught him making a mistake. I'd caught him doing what he always did, cutting corners and hoping no one smart enough would notice. But someone had. Me. And now? He was cornered. Exactly where I wanted him. Brian didn't even try to hide his fury. As soon as the meeting adjourned, he all but slammed his laptop shut, his teeth clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a molar. His handshake with the Lexicon exec was stiff, rushed, like a man who wanted to run but had nowhere left to go. I didn't follow him out. I didn't gloat. That wasn't my style. Natalie leaned over as we packed up our notes. "Think he's going to recover from that?" I gave her a thin smile. "Only if someone hands him a new personality." Later that afternoon, back at Stratfield HQ, the mood was light, even celebratory. But I didn't uncork the champagne yet. Not because I wasn't confident, I was, but because I knew Lexicon wasn't finished. Big clients like that didn't make billion-dollar decisions in one boardroom. They liked drama, and right on cue, it came the next morning. A sleek envelope, hand-delivered to our office by a courier dressed like he walked off a movie set. Inside was a single letter, embossed with the Lexicon seal. To Strategic Partners from the Executive Board of Lexicon Freight Systems. Following yesterday's preliminary presentations, the board has elected to extend the selection process. Both Stratfield Group and Winston & Locke will be invited to deliver final proposals at an exclusive negotiation summit to be held this Friday. Location: the Imperial Room, Blackstone Grand Hotel. Time: 11 a.m. Format: private presentation, closed conda, and strategic alignment review. This will be the final evaluation. Natalie raised an eyebrow. The Blackstone Grand? That's the most expensive hotel in the city, I finished for her. Of course. They want a show. They're about to get one. We spent the next 3 days preparing like we were going into battle. Every slide, every answer, every whisper of data had to be razor sharp. But this time, it wasn't just about content. It was about presence. Lexicon had seen me in a cornered room, catching mistakes. Now they'd see me owning one. Meanwhile, word spread fast. By Wednesday afternoon, we got confirmation from a third-party contact that Winston & Locke was in total disarray. Brian had reportedly screamed at his analyst. There were whispers that someone from their compliance department was now reviewing his numbers. Too little, too late. And as for Brian himself, he hadn't reached out. Not a single message. Not a snide email. Not a cryptic jab, which told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't regrouping, he was panicking. And come Friday, he'd have to walk into the most prestigious conference room in the city and pretend he hadn't been outmaneuvered by the background girl he once laughed out of Belladine. I wasn't going for revenge. I was going for a legacy. Friday arrived with surgical precision. The Blackstone Grand stood like a temple above the city. White columns, gold trim, and staff trained to make you feel rich just by standing near them. The Imperial Room was on the top floor, surrounded by glass, with a panoramic view of downtown like the city itself was holding its breath. I arrived early, not because I needed time, I was ready, but because I wanted to watch Brian walk in. This time, I wasn't in the observation room. This time, I was sitting at the table. The final list of participants had already been submitted to Lexicon's legal team 2 days ago. Stratfield had requested to lead the joint review of all prior reports submitted, including Winston & Locke's revised model. And when their admin called to ask if Brian should be included, I answered plainly, no. There was a pause. Can we ask why? Because he is unable to submit a report, I said coolly. There's no point in him being there. I let the silence stretch, then added, tell him there's a KFC down the block if he's hungry. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and it tasted better than I'd imagined. Now, in the Imperial Room, I stood by the tall windows, sipping water like it was champagne as Winston & Locke's delegation filtered in. Brian entered last. He paused at the doorway, scanning the table, clearly expecting to see his name. It wasn't there. He blinked. Then blinked again, as if the room would rearrange itself for him if he waited long enough. Natalie greeted their team with poise, then turned to the Lexicon rep beside her. We've decided to streamline today's agenda, she said. Only data-submitting representatives are invited to participate. The Lexicon lead nodded. That was our request as well. Clean room, real work. Brian's face tightened. There must be a mistake. I'm not on the list, I said, turning to face him fully. I didn't include you. He stared at me. What? I didn't include you, Brian, I said louder, clearer. You didn't submit a single accurate projection in 2 quarters. You're not here to pitch, you're here to observe. A few heads turned. Lexicon's legal team tried, and failed, to hide their amusement. I stepped closer, voice calm but deliberate. There's a fast food place on the corner. Maybe grab something for old time's sake? Brian's eyes darkened. His fists clenched. But he didn't speak. He couldn't. Because every word would confirm the one thing he feared more than being wrong. That he no longer mattered here. He turned sharply and walked out, his shoes echoing down the marble hallway, each step a little louder than the last. I watched him go, not with anger, not with glee, just peace. Because this wasn't vengeance. It was balance. And this time, I held the pen dot. After Brian walked out, the air in the room shifted. It was subtle, like when a plane levels off after turbulence. The rest of the Winston and Locke team tried to pretend nothing happened, but their discomfort clung to them like humidity. You could feel it in their clipped tones and rigid posture. They were exposed now, vulnerable. I sat down at the center of the long glass table and opened my laptop. My slides were already cued, clean, elegant, unflinching. Lexicon's senior director leaned forward. "Stratfield, you may proceed." I didn't stand. I didn't pace or gesture dramatically. That wasn't my style. I clicked to the first slide, an interactive supply chain dashboard I'd rebuilt from scratch, and began to speak. Calm, clear, undeniable. "This is your current logistics model," I said. "What we're proposing isn't just a replacement, it's a reinvention." For the next 40 minutes, I walked them through every layer of our proposal. We addressed their pain points, not with buzzwords, but with actual solutions. Automated load balancing, redundant route mitigation, dynamic fuel cost projections, real-time vendor scoring. I spoke to them like they were partners, not prospects. And they listened. They asked tough questions. I answered everyone. Not because I rehearsed, but because I knew. I'd built this proposal in my bones. It wasn't just numbers on a slide. It was my fingerprint. By the time I finished, you could feel it. That collective pause when a room has made up its mind, but is still pretending to be neutral. Lexicon's lead stood and said, "Let's break for 10 minutes. We'll reconvene for a final vote." When they left the room, Natalie turned to me. "You just buried them." I shook my head. "I didn't bury anyone." She smiled. "Then what would you call it?" "I outgrew them," I said, and finally let them notice. When we returned to the room, Lexicon's senior director didn't waste time. "We'd like to proceed with Stratfield Group," he said simply. "Contingent on the implementation timeline and compliance review, we'd like to begin onboarding immediately." A ripple of reaction passed through the room. Not gasps, not cheers. Just quiet awe. Natalie leaned toward me. "You want the final word?" I stood, smoothed the front of my blazer, and nodded. "Thank you," I said, looking around the table. "We don't take this lightly. You'll get our full team, full commitment, full transparency, starting today." One of Lexicon's lawyers slid a contract folder across the table. "Please note," he added, almost as an afterthought, "we've requested one special clause before execution." I glanced at it. Read it once. Read it again. It was one line. "Winston and Locke employee Brandon H. shall be excluded from any current or future collaborative efforts involving Lexicon Freight Systems and Stratfield Group." I looked up. The director met my eyes and shrugged. "Our team prefers working with professionals who don't fudge data." I said nothing. I didn't smile. I simply picked up the pen and signed.